quest to feel a sense of connection or perhaps some kind of order, maybe something that you have sought for too. And certainly it has been for me. I've always wanted to believe that there was some kind of order. And perhaps it was because my own childhood was full of so much chaos. I wanted to believe that some way, somehow, that there was an order and that my life made sense. I grew up with a God that was a God that I could either please or I could disappoint. And that kind of shaped that part of it. But I always felt an underneath feeling of support and connection, but I couldn't articulate it into words. And I'm sure many of you feel the same. And I would sometimes have the experience of a synchronicity, you know, where you'd be thinking about someone and they would call you and you would think, oh, or you would really need an answer about something and you would turn on the radio and there it was, or on the TV. So there would be these moments where I would feel like, oh, yes, there's order. But then there would be these other things that happened in my life that were like total chaos. And I would think, oh, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't sure whether there was any synchronicity or order there. So I kept on searching for that. And about 4 years ago, I had the privilege of having a synchronistic moment, of being invited to hear a speaker at the Wellness Center in Okotoks. And it was 8 o'clock at night, someone phoned me, there was the speaker coming. It was in the middle of my dance class, and I was kind of in one of those moods, where you might go, I don't know if I should go, and what's going to happen in an hour? And there was lots of whining. Anyway, I did go, and I had the privilege to meet Dr. John DeMartini. And there in that moment, I heard an inkling of how there was actually an underlying order. And so I began to study with him and learned quite surprisingly that some of the answers I was seeking came from quantum physics. Quantum physics. I was just, it couldn't have been farther from my mind. And he explained it in a very simple way, and I'm going to take a moment to try and explain a little bit of it to you so that you can maybe have a sense of what I did that day. And what they discovered in quantum physics actually is that we're all made up of light. And to me, I thought, well, that makes sense. Many of us have thought that for hundreds of years, and a lot of the mystics have thought that for thousands of years. And what they proved it was actually scientific. So when we looked at the atom, within the atom there was the positron, which was the positive charge, and there was the electron, which was the negative charge. And that it took both aspects of this to make the atom, and that they were undivisible. You couldn't break them apart. Well, you could break them apart. That was the interesting thing, but they reacted the same. So they did this wonderful study where they took half to a special chamber thousands of miles from the other half. And what they did to the positron affected the electron. And so it became known that that was whole and complete. So what Dr. DeMartini did was that he took this concept that there is a positive and a negative charge into the realm of psychology. And that absolutely everything has this positive and negative aspect to it. And that in itself isn't new, because we think of the yin and the yang, the up and the down. But that it was more like a wavelength of light. So anything that we experienced, anytime we had a thought, that there was two parts of that thought. And I don't know about you, but I experience that often when I'm trying to make a decision. I think, okay, I can see this side of it, right? This is kind of what I think works about it, and this is the part that I think doesn't work about it. But really, it was actually happening all the time, right down into each of the individual traits. And what I saw was a way to explain some of the things that I had been experiencing. So if we look at a trait, for example, like lying, depending on your values, you would look at lying and say, well, lying is, there's lots of drawbacks to lying. That is not a good thing. But haven't we all lied? in a way that we thought was beneficial to someone. You know, when someone has come along and they're all excited about something and they say, "Isn't this great?" And you're looking over and you think, sorta, kinda. And you say, yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. So we all have used lying, and it's a very tricky thing as a parent. You know, you teach your children not to lie, and then they say, "Mom, didn't you just say to Auntie Joy?" You know, and then you're caught. But soon children learn that there are two sides to everything as well. And one of the great things that I did was realize that even on the positive things, there is drawbacks to it, like understanding. I always wanted to be very understanding. I'm a craniosacral therapist, and I wanted to understand people, what they were going through, and I couldn't imagine that there was any drawback to understanding. What I realized was there was, because sometimes when I was so understanding, I didn't necessarily get in and get the issue resolved for that person. Or have you also felt in your own life that when you've been understanding that maybe people take advantage of you? That they just kind of... So really, there are lots of examples where you can see that there's two sides to those kinds of traits. There's also two sides to our experiences. And when we see that in its totality, we have a different appreciation for it. But in the moment, the way that our mind is actually set up is that we can only see one side at a time. And I think that's very interesting because it sets us up to have some kind of emotional charge. So if I see an experience that I think is a good thing. So let's say I see people all gathered together and I see them talking and sharing ideas and I think, oh, that's a good thing because I believe in community. So I look over and from that perspective it looks good. And then when I get closer, I realize they're all gathered around kicking a dog. I mean, isn't your perception instantly changed? What you thought was a gathering of something wonderful now has this tainted side to it. And we go through those kinds of experiences all the time. But what if it weren't this kind of lump dump, like a bit positive, negative, beneficial, not take? What if they actually were happening all the time? Because that's at the same time, because that's what we saw in the quantum physics, didn't they? That we couldn't separate them. So when we have these experiences in our life, if we can see both sides of it, you can have a different approach to it. So, for example, I was working with a client of mine, and she came in and she was very disgruntled and crawling down the table and said, you know, the weekend had been hard, and I asked her why that had been, and she said, you know, it's my husband, you know, he's just not spiritual. I said, oh, really? Like, what do you mean? And she said, oh, you know, like, he's never, you know, wanting to know, you know, how the kids are feeling and what they're doing, and never wants to talk about his feelings and you know, meditate and do all the things that I want to do. I said, oh, well, what about that, you know, really bothers you? And she said, oh, just the whole thing. So I asked her, I said, if there are two sides